1, 2, check 1, 2. Okay. And it looks like we're live, so I'll hand it over to Karen to start the meeting. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, committee. Members of the public are advised that individuals and the media may be audibly and/or visually recording this meeting. I would like to call this meeting of the Heritage Permit Review Subcommittee, June 16th, 2026, to order. Please note that quorum is present. Committee, you have before you the agenda for this meeting. May I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented? I see Angie and I see Graham. And is there anyone opposed? Seeing none. And Matthew, if you did want to comment, since I don't see you because your camera's not on, please just raise your hand electronically, okay? Thanks.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks. And also, let me just check before we get going, is is Sandra on the line? Is that you, Sandra 1437?
I am.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
it's Sandra.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, and so same to you. If you do have any questions, please raise electronically. Um, all right, so seeing none opposed, that motion is carried for the approval of the agenda. Are there any declarations of interest today? Okay, none declared. And approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. So you have before you the HPRC meeting minutes of May 19th, 2026. May I have a motion to approve the minutes as presented? See Carol, thank you. And Andy, thank you. And is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. Okay, so today we'll be moving on to section 6 on the agenda, which is items for information. We don't have any applications for permit review. However, we do have 2 presentations. And so our first presentation is on Indigenous Relations Division training, overview of Hamilton's Urban Indigenous Strategy and Implementation Plan. And so I'm happy to welcome today Beth Dockstator. I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. Feel free to correct me. And Manager of Indigenous Relations in the Indigenous Relations Division. So Beth, welcome
Hi.
to the meeting. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I will hand it over to you.
My pleasure. Thank you. So, hello, everyone. My name is Beth Dockstader. I am the Manager of Indigenous Relations for the City of Hamilton. I am born and raised in the City of Hamilton, part of the urban Indigenous community in Hamilton, as well as a member of the Oneida Nations of the Thames River up by London, Ontario. Very, very happy to be here today. Thank you so much for your invitation. I welcome any opportunity to talk about the work my team does within the City of Hamilton. We're kind of a small but mighty team who's tasked with a really large portfolio that crosses the entire organization. So I'm happy today to be here to give you a little insight into the Urban Indigenous Strategy, the work that we complete, and again, very, very happy to be here. So do I share my screen or does the presentation get shared?
I'll ask staff that. What would you prefer? Alyssa?
Through the chair, Alyssa Golden, Culture Heritage Program Lead. Beth, if you're able to share on your end and advance the slides, that's great. Otherwise, we can pull it up, whatever's best for you.
I got it here. All right, so bear with me. Sometimes I become a bit of a motor mouth, so I will do my best to stay within the 10 minutes, but not go too fast. And I'm happy to answer any questions after or any follow-up. So just give me 2 seconds to share my screen. Oh, Alyssa, sorry, are you there?
Yep, right here.
Sorry, if I share my screen, I can't see my notes. That's the only other issue I'm
okay.
having.
Not a problem. I will pull up your slides and share on my end, and then you can just let me know when you want to advance. Just 1 sec.
Amazing, thank you. Okay, awesome. Nyawa, Alyssa. Okay, so again, here today to present on the Urban Indigenous Strategy and our implementation plan. So just caught an error right from the start. It's not June 2027, it's June 2026 on my first slide. However, if we could advance to the next slide, I'd be happy to introduce my team. So our team has exponentially grown over the last 7 years that the Urban Indigenous Strategy has been in implementation. So we originally started with a project manager, which has now grown into a team of 6 people, and hopefully and willingly will continue to grow. So Indigenous Relations team, who are we? So we have Travis Hill. Travis Hill is a citizen of the Tuscarora Nation Beaver Clan. Travis works with our team as the Indigenous Curator for Indigenous Culture and Heritage with the City of Hamilton and works between the Heritage Resource Management Team and the Indigenous Relations Team. We have Jennifer DiDomenico. Jennifer is the Senior Project Manager of Indigenous Relations and has been in her role since 2021, working with the local treaty nations and the urban Indigenous community on strategic initiatives and different capacities within the city. We then have Luke Gambacourt. He is our Project Manager of Indigenous Community Outreach and Research Coordinator for our Indigenous Relations team. Luke's role is to lead outreach and engagement efforts for the urban Indigenous community and surrounding Indigenous First Nations in Hamilton. I've already introduced myself as, again, I've worked for the city for the last 15 years. The last 4 years, I've been working on the Indigenous Relations team. And previously, I held the capacity of as an Ontario Works case manager for 12 years within the city. Next slide, please, Alyssa. Awesome. Next, we have Brandy Paslik. There we go. Brandy is an Indigenous woman of mixed race, Métis, Cree, and European descent, and is an intergenerational survivor of the residential school system. Brandy is our project manager of Indigenous initiatives and is passionate about building meaningful relationships while supporting the Indigenous community. Caitlin LaForme. One thing to note is that recently, in the last 2 years, we've brought on Kate as our Director of Indigenous Relations, which is really exciting because it catapulted Indigenous Relations into our own division within the city, which is exciting to have that sort of momentum within the city to be able to run our strategy. So Kate is our Director of Indigenous Relations and is an Anishinaabe from the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation on her father's side and Cayuga Bear Clan on her mother's side. Growing up on reserve and returning home after university has provided her with over 13 years of experience working with Indigenous communities and partnering agencies and governments. Most recently, she was the Executive Director of Intergovernmental Affairs for the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And then our final team member who's joined recently is Kelly Burnside. So Kelly is the Indigenous Fee Subsidy Worker. Kelly previously worked as an Ontario Works case manager since 2009 and a community relations worker with City Housing Hamilton. Kelly is a First Nations person, an urban Indigenous to Hamilton, and a member of the Six Nations of the Grand River. So as you can see, we have a great mix of people. We've very much grown our team in the last 3-4 years. I think it's important to note that our team is a mix of Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. Both Kate and I as manager and director are very passionate that it takes all of us to do this type of work. Allies, First Nations people, Indigenous people, it takes everyone to do this type of work. So we're very proud of the fact that we do have allies on our team as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so a little bit of background information. Sorry, just give me 1 second. So, in the spring of 2015, Hamilton City Council committed to developing an urban Indigenous strategy that would identify actions and strengthen the city's relationship with Indigenous communities and local First Nations. In June 2019, the city released the Hamilton Urban Indigenous Strategy, or the UIS, which Council endorsed. The City of Hamilton embarked on a journey to reconciliation to honor the history, knowledge, rights, languages, and cultures of the First People of Canada. The UIS identifies actions and charts out a path to reconciliation that aims to strengthen the city's relationship with the Indigenous community and our local First Nation communities. The Urban Indigenous Strategy Implementation Plan was fully endorsed by City Council on February the 4th, 2021. The implementation plan is categorized into 6 working groups that address the recommendations from the strategy's final report, which will be covered more in detail later in this presentation. The Urban Indigenous Strategy for the City of Hamilton responds to the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions of Canada calls to action and was created based on the voices of our urban Indigenous community members and local First Nation communities. Next slide, please. So the Urban Indigenous Strategy identifies actions to strengthen the city's relationships with the urban Indigenous community and treaty nations. So ways that we do this is some of our key objectives of our strategy is to identify actions within municipal jurisdiction, and capacity arising from the TRC calls to action to celebrate and honor Indigenous people, culture, and traditions, to promote a greater understanding among all Hamiltonians through public education on histories and contributions of Indigenous people, and to create opportunities for education and internal collaboration among city staff to strengthen the relationship with the Indigenous community. Next slide, please. So, as a way of understanding how the TRC calls to action and community input fit together, excuse me, the Urban Indigenous Strategy uses strategic themes of land, spirit, and people. These themes were chosen as a way to take municipal action to take a municipal action plan and connect it to an Indigenous understanding of the relationships Indigenous people and humans have to land, to each other, and spirituality. Each of the themes provide, Each of the themes provide numbered strategic actions within the city that should be addressing in the UIS and implementation plan. Of the 21 action items prioritized by the Indigenous Relation Team, 13 are in progress, 1 is ongoing recurring, none have been fully complete, and there are 7 of the actions that have yet to be initiated. We recognize that transitioning the organization to work better and collectively with Indigenous people will take time, and we continue to make progress that is varied cross-departmentally. Some of the actions that are not underway reflect the fact that they represent systemic change. These are in broad scope and require significant corporate responsibility to implement. Some examples of some of the actions that are currently in progress. So under our people theme, number 24, the action is to enable city staff to deliver city services in a culturally appropriate way. So some examples of how we have done that is we have initiated an Indigenous specific fee subsidy childcare worker in the Children and Community Services Division. We seek out opportunities to educate staff internally to be more culturally aware and apply it to their work. Researching and exploring more coordinated ways for municipal services to be delivered to Indigenous residents. Another one of under our spirit actions, number 11, is to incorporate more Indigenous stories and voices into the city's culture and heritage plans. So what we've done so far is we've established the Curator of Indigenous Heritage and Culture, which is a role that's held in the Heritage Resource Management Division. Gathering Indigenous perspectives to be added to site monuments through our Landmarks and Monuments Review. Enhancing exhibit development to highlight Indigenous stories at our local museums. Landmarks and Monuments Project will provide additional opportunities. We recently took a report back to council in 2025, reviewing some of the landmarks and monuments within the city of Hamilton. The recommendations from our team were there needs to be an opportunity for Indigenous voices and stories to be told at these monuments. Oftentimes, Indigenous voices and histories were not included when those monuments were created, and we're looking for an opportunity to allow our versions of these monuments to be told as well. Our team has been working on this project for quite some time, and recently we're approved to start the signage. So right now we're working under a project right now to get the signage created through local Indigenous historians, so they will stand side by side at these monuments moving forward. Okay. Another big thing that we're working on right now under the land, the land action is number 3, to improve meaningful consultation with urban Indigenous residents and First Nations community on municipal projects, plans, and approvals. So a lot of different consultations happening in different areas of the organization, including an active monitoring and input to archaeological projects. We started to circulate planning applications and involve nations on municipal planning policies and processes. Actively inviting the urban Indigenous community to be a part of working groups. For example, some of the projects we're working on right now, the Discovery Center, we have members of the urban Indigenous community who sit at these strategic planning tables as well within the community, as we strive to create a larger network within our urban Indigenous community. Next slide, please. So as a corporate strategy, we We need departments to have an active role in ownership and council and mayor for the outcomes of the actions on the UIS to really progress. Every division should be including the UIS actions and the TRC calls to action in their work plans and performance accountability and development plans. Reconciliation not only requires apologies, reparations, the relearning of Canada's national history and public commemoration also needs real social, political, and economic change. Next slide, please. So, the city's Indigenous Relations team is focused on furthering the strategy through the foundation of guiding principles through our implementation action plan and aligning the key initiatives. It also guides the City of Hamilton to a place that values intercultural understanding, formulating a community-led framework, and acknowledging and addressing colonization and supporting goals of reconciliation. While the implementation plan identifies timelines, resources, and priorities to move forward, with action items identified in the UIS, the progress of our work has been significantly delayed by some factors outside of our control, such as COVID, the cyber attack, staffing resources, and changes. However, we are working hard and getting stuff done within the urban Indigenous strategy within the city. Next slide, please. Through the Urban Indigenous Strategy implementation plan, staff have outlined the process and priorities to move forward on the Urban Indigenous Strategy actions. We've created cross-divisional work groups that have been established to collaborate on the strategy initiatives that began in 2025 and 2026. So the working groups that we currently have are broken down out of the strategy and the different spirit, land, theme actions. So our 6 working groups, and we've sort of taken the actions and plopped them into each one of these buckets. These are the departments and groups that will work on these individual actions within the strategy. So we have a group on education, awareness, guidance, and policies. We have another group 2, ecological, archaeological, and natural heritage group. We have group 3, which is public art, museum markers, and heritage group. Group 4, land, culture, and cultural spaces group. Group 5, sports, recreation, and tourism group. And group 6, housing, employment, health, and food. So the purpose and the mandate of these groups are to coordinate the associate actions within their division and work collaboratively with those other departments on these actions. Help to define and details necessary to achieve the actions within the UIS, and share information, champion relationship building, and identify opportunities for improvement regarding city services and initiatives. The 40 actions that were identified in the UIS are based on consultation with the Indigenous communities to create a pathway towards collaboration and awareness, which measures commitment through those continued consultation and accountability. The success of this strategy is dependent on the engagement of staff across the corporation and involvement by all city departments. Reconciliation is everyone's work. The Indigenous Relations Division provides leadership and coordinates the working groups and will be responsible for helping to implement specific actions. Beyond the UIS, beyond the Urban Indigenous Strategy and Implementation Plan, the Urban Indigenous staff are supporting all levels of leadership across departments, along with Mayor, City Council, advising them on reconciliation journey initiatives, including but not limited to infrastructure development, planning files, policy creation, and strategic plans for each department and division. The scope of the work the Indigenous Relations Division is responsible for reaches across the organization as a whole and requires support and leadership from staff at all levels. We are a small but mighty team and always happy to help advise in whatever capacity we are able. Next slide, please. So some of the examples of work that we do within the Urban Indigenous strategy is for number 1, the Urban Indigenous, the UIS corporate implementation, which I just explained. We have our Days of Recognition program. So our days of recognition are days like National Indigenous Peoples Day, National Indigenous History Month, Treaties Week, National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, and we enhance educational opportunities for staff as well as the public where possible. We help to create, we're looking to create a framework for corporate training programs, rolling out Indigenous cultural capacity training corporate-wide, guidance and advice to other divisions and departments. So working on relationship building, relationship agreements, relationship repairing with our local First Nations and treaty partners. Policy review and other miscellaneous policies and procedures that we are looking at within the city. Our fee subsidy role and participating in various subgroup works across divisionally. And again, whatever we are tasked to do at that point. I just wanted to highlight a few of the projects that our team has been involved with over the past couple of years. We have been working on the Discovery Center feasibility project and design and redevelopment, as well as the West Harbor Library branch that's going to be opening in August of this year down at the Harborfront at Pier 4. We've been working on archaeological and EA natural heritage monitoring programs and policies. We work with Public Works and Planning and Economic Development on various projects that require engagement with our nations. The Bindigan Community Cup project, Community and Safety Wellbeing Plan, the Recreation Programming, and the list goes on and on. We've also recently had a few policies that we reviewed. The City of Hamilton has the use of Indigenous medicines policy, which is the way to break down municipal barriers to allow the use of Indigenous medicines in our corporate facilities. So we did a lot of engagement, review, work with internally to remove all those barriers that people need in order to use our medicines within city facilities. We are currently working on reviewing our land acknowledgement, review and revision, working with our treaty partners and our nations to come to an understanding of what a proper land acknowledgement looks like for the City of Hamilton. If there's any issues with our current one, just doing our due diligence. And I'm also working on right now the creation of a sacred fire policy and procedure. Within the city, there's a lot of agencies that like to hold sacred fires. We're trying our best to remove any municipal barriers that they would have in order to proceed with these fires. We've been working on an overarching Indigenous engagement policy for city administration and an Indigenous procurement policy. We also are very much connected to the community in Hamilton. So within our team, we sit on a municipal connection circle for Indigenous relations for all of Canada. We sit on a couple boards with them to review just all of us doing that work to get that support for us to be able to do this work. It is hard to do on a lot of times. Circle of Beads, Environment Assessment Work Group, the Joint Stewardship Board, and we sit cross-divisionally on many projects. Next slide, please. So within the work that we do, I think one of the biggest positive outcomes we could get is allyship. Indigenous allyship is the act of non-Indigenous people learning from and supporting Indigenous people by amplifying their voices, challenging oppressive systems, and actively working to dismantle settler colonialism. It requires ongoing education, self-reflection, cultural humility, and a deep commitment to recognizing and respecting Indigenous peoples' inherent rights and expertise in their own realities. Next slide, please. So some key principles of Indigenous allyship. I think, a prime example of Indigenous allyship is my invitation here today to speak to your group. I think that that's always an opportunity to educate yourself, learn about the histories and the current realities of Indigenous people, including topics like intergenerational trauma and systemic inequalities. Next, you can amplify Indigenous voices, support and champion Indigenous-led initiatives and approaches by giving space and power to Indigenous people and voices rather than speaking for them. Number 3, acknowledge privilege. Recognize the systemic advantages that settler cultures hold and work to dismantle the barriers that affect Indigenous communities. Practicing humility and respect, understanding that Indigenous people are experts in their own lives and cultures, and approach learning with an open heart and a willingness to be corrected. A commitment to action. Allyship is an ongoing practice, not a label. It involves taking consistent action to challenge racism and dismantle oppressive structures. and building meaningful relationships. Fostering genuine connections by asking questions, listening, and engaging with Indigenous communities respectfully and with permission. Next slide, please. How to be how to be an ally in the work that you do. So by diversifying your knowledge base, supporting Indigenous organizations, challenging harmful representations and stereotypes, advocating for policy change, and commit to personal acts of reconciliation personally and professionally. Take time to educate yourself. That can be anything from treaties to understanding local histories of the lands on which you reside, learning of all the community resources servicing Indigenous people in the community, and what supports and programs are available. Supporting Indigenous organizations or community initiatives within the city. Speaking up against cultural appropriation and stereotypes when you encounter them. Support political initiatives that promote Indigenous rights and well-being. Overall, being an ally is not a one-time act. It's an ongoing practice that requires continuous learning and commitment. The 94 calls to action are 94 policy recommendations made by the TRC Commission of Canada to address the legacy of Canada's residential school system and advance the process of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. They urge governments, courts, business, and churches and public to take action on areas such as child welfare, education, language and culture, health, justice, and reconciliation to achieve a future where Indigenous children can grow up healthy, safe, and proud. Understanding and reading the 94 calls to action across As a small reminder before we end, everyone should be prioritizing reconciliation all year long, not just in the month of September. And by understanding how you can be an ally in the work that you do is the first step. Next slide. So again, I just wanted to thank everyone, a big nyawa for having me here today. I understand within 10 minutes is really hard to give a brief overview of everything that we do. I hope that I've given maybe started the conversation where we continue this conversation ongoing. If there's an open invitation to come back, I'd love our team maybe, every a little couple months to come in and give an update to the committee if they would like. But Alyssa, if we could just go to the last slide, I always just like to share some pictures of our team and the work that we do and the events. And we have grown exponentially, and it's because of the support, like these types of committees, like our mayor and council, our senior leadership, who have really dove into the urban Indigenous strategy and given us the opportunity to do this in a good way and have Indigenous people at the helm making these decisions, which is huge. So again, a huge nowie for everyone's time today. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions, or if there's questions afterwards, please let me know. And another shameless plug, well, maybe not shameless, but this Friday, June 19th from 12 till 4, we have our National Indigenous Peoples Day celebration down at Pier 4 at All Our Relations, those beautiful structures we have down at Pier 4 Park. We have many performers coming. We have an exciting, we've never had one in the city before, Inuit throat singer. We have some Métis fiddler. We have performances from Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and Six Nations, as well as a gigantic vendor market. We have over 20 Indigenous vendors. We're going to be down there on Friday. And usually, just to preface, we do usually do it on June 21st. However, there's a long-standing other event that's always the same weekend in Hamilton, which is the Soaring Spirits Festival. And because we're so well entrenched in the community, we didn't want anyone to have to choose their events. So we moved ours to the 19th just for this month. So there was no contention between the two. We want everyone to go to the Soaring Spirits Festival as well, which is held from Friday to Sunday down at Battlefield Fieldcoat Museum and Park. So again, yeah.
Okay. Beth, thank you so much. That was fascinating. And I had no idea that much activity was going on in Hamilton. So that's actually really good to hear. Is there anyone on the committee have any questions for Beth? I see Graham. Please go ahead, Graham. And Steve. Okay, after. Go
Well,
ahead.
thank you very much for coming and joining us, Beth. We really appreciate it. As you know, this came out of a heritage permit when it first started the conversation. So first thing I want to do is apologize. I won't be able to join you Friday because we have the Ontario Heritage Conference coming into Hamilton that day.
Right.
And we picked a very bad day to overlap events, sadly. So hopefully next year I'll get a chance to join you. Now, how can we as a committee assist the Indigenous people in their journey to make things better for them in the city?
I think the biggest thing is building those relationships and the understanding and reaching out to the communities and understanding what they want to be involved in. And I think at this point, a prime example was when we brought the 77 gauge to this permit review, was the comments we received back warmed my heart. And it honestly made me feel that there is a wave of change and that people do want to see that. And, Graham, some of your comments during that committee meeting, wherein that's how you be an ally. And then you invited me back to share my knowledge and our program and our strategy with that. And so I think that, just asking questions, building your own relationships within the community, and then just continuing your own learning is the biggest journey. And please, and I always preface with saying, please just get involved in the community. Our events, our Indigenous events in the city are for everyone. And we very much use those as educational opportunities to highlight what we're doing in the city, where people can go for supports, or people can do that as well. And you can always reach out to our team. We have an Indigenous relations page within the city where we promote all of our events, all of our learning, all of our opportunities. And if you ever wanted to do any further training, our team has a list of different trainings we can provide, or ones that we've sourced already. But I think the biggest thing is just a genuine understanding of allowing Indigenous people to lead the work that they're doing, and by understanding and being creative, wherein, a lot of the times the struggle we run into is that when we're trying to be innovative, this whole strategy is tasked with doing something in a culturally appropriate way. And so if, we have the opportunity to do things differently than we've done it in the city, we need to do so. We can't just fall back to well, that's just how we've always done it. Well, is there a different way that we can do that works within both? And so very much think that just the education, building the relationships, and being vocal in the community and supporting that. When you hear other things, you hear other, ideas that maybe aren't aligning to the way you think, please speak up and say that out loud to people, and continue those conversations. My team is absolutely willing to be a support in any. You can feel free to reach out to myself or my team through our Indigenous relations email. But again, I think those are just this committee's on the right track, is just that first invitation to come in and have a conversation and sit down and see what evolves from there. That's how you build relationships.
Nice.
Thank you. Part of my exposure to the Truth and Reconciliation was an amazing young lady who came to speak to us, First Nations person, who came to speak to us at Brockville, one of the previous Heritage conferences. And one sentence she said that I'll never forget is, "Nothing for us without us." And that just sticks in your head. And that's what we have to understand, that we're not leading the conversation sometimes, we're listening to it.
And that's how you're an ally, right? And you're absolutely right, is that two voices are better than one. And so, Indigenous people have felt very much so that our voices have been stifled or contained, or our knowledge wasn't, valuable. But it's, again, having that idea that we get to lead the way. We don't need others to lead the way for us. We need people to stand beside us and do the work and support us. And that's reconciliation. It's not about Indigenous people. And again, Indigenous people, reconciliation isn't Indigenous people's work. We can work together on it, but it's also the responsibility of non-Indigenous people. And so I think that, just coming to, again, this is a perfect example of us building a relationship that will be ongoing, where we can continue to come back and update the group. And again, if there's anything else we can provide assistance with, we are absolutely happy to.
Great.
Thank you. So I'll let someone else ask a question.
Now, Graham.
I think I saw Steve had a comment or question.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it is, if it's a question or a comment or just an idea, but Beth, maybe you can help me turn this into something. But I guess while I was listening to you, I was thinking about the work that this committee does. We're often interpreting a bylaw about, heritage and architectural features and that sort of thing. And a lot of the time we're trying to preserve structures and buildings. But I'm realizing after listening to you today, all of those structures and buildings and houses and everything that we talk about here, it's a reflection of arguably one very specific culture and, you know, a relatively small slice of historical time period too, right? So, and there's a lot of legislation and bylaws, policies, and all that sort of stuff, you know, designed to really specifically support and uphold these artifacts of one specific settler culture, you know, and I'm just, it's kind of making me realize kind of an aha moment of sorts that I can't articulate. Um, Putting all these resources, you know, and laws into work, you know, to preserve this element of my culture, you know, I wonder, you know, will your team be able to look at, you know, maybe the bylaws and stuff that inform the work that, you know, a committee like this one does, so that, you know, it's not always just, you know, one culture and its heritage at the cost of others being preserved?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. And I think that um, is what these implementation groups are. So I've actually written down what you said, because again, that's a great suggestion. And it's this work is new, right? So we're always looking to evolve in different ways. And I think the fear comes when there's this feeling that we're trying to take over someone else's history or someone else's, you know, version of what happened. But that's two things can be true at the same time, where I think the 77 gauge project there respectfully showed that we can change a building's appearance for a reason of reconciliation, however still maintain the integrity of the heritageness of that building. So those two things can coexist at the same time. And I think that that's where we need to lean more towards, is that coordination of our resources and our understanding, and having the ability to bend those rules a little bit and maybe change those rules, just as you were mentioning. And that's where, again, for example, if I can compare it to something else, we have a use of Indigenous medicines policy. And so I kind of giggled in at the point where it was being created, nobody was using Indigenous medicines in the city. So someone created this policy and procedure with every consideration you can have. However, the only people it was restricting from using medicines was me and my team. It made us have a 5-day window. I had to turn off the HVAC. We had to call facilities. We had to do all these types of things. And my point was, you know, I don't have to notify you if I want to take an Advil. But if I want to use my medicines in my office, I need to tell you 5 days before, shut down the HVAC. And so I used it as an educational opportunity where I brought together directors into one of these meeting rooms and I lit up my smudge bowl. And they all looked around and said, oh my goodness, it won't set the sprinklers off. It won't set this off. It won't do that. And so what were we so afraid of? And so that's where, again, my job is to show that this can be done. And I just need that support from others to think outside the box and say, hey, we have an opportunity to be innovative. And again, I really honestly believe it's about that collaboration and that working together so that both people are getting what they want out of the situation. Oftentimes they think, you know, we're trying to elevate Indigenous voices over everyone's voices. I think the difference is Indigenous voices have been down here. We want to be side by side. That's what the Two-World Wampum talked about, was everyone's in their own canoe. We can go side by side, but we don't need that weaving in and out. And I think that we're at the precipice where we're all at this age where we want to learn. We understand those tragedies. I am the granddaughter still of 2 residential school survivors who went to the Mushwell Mohawk Institute in Brantford. I'm dealing with the intergenerational trauma of living in the city. And now I've tasked myself with doing this work. And it's all of my family is in some type of reconciliation work because we believe in it. But I also believe in, again, working together. And once we do, we'll have that synergy of being able to make effective change that satisfies everyone, that isn't so scary. When we started the Landmarks and Monuments Review, I think the idea was that Indigenous people are coming to take away our histories. No, we just want ours heard too, and it can sit beside yours. And even if it's different than yours, those two things are true. We've done the research. We have our own historians. We know ourselves best. And just like Graham said, nothing with us without us. You can't write about us anymore unless we're involved in that and those things moving forward. So I think that idea of those bylaw changes and all of that. But again, I never want the impression to be that we're trying to make radical change. We are trying to layer that change that feels good for everyone. And so we're all involved in that reconciliation. So I hope that's helpful, Steve. And if you'd like further conversation, absolutely happy to have it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Alyssa, yes.
Thanks, Karen. And just building off of Beth's very thoughtful comments on our side of things in terms of our team and how we approach writing designation bylaws, there's been a concerted effort to reflect broader understandings and cultural histories. And we've had a few examples more recently where we've done research, but then consulted with folks like Travis and Luke on the Indigenous Relations team in terms of the Indigenous component of the histories that we're telling and making sure that we're telling them appropriately and with the right tone. And Two Hat Street is a great example of where we're sort of weaving together and understanding what was happening at the time in terms of Indigenous history, also Black history. So something that we, as Beth was mentioning, in terms of what we can do as allies and weave into our work, that's sort of one component that we're continuing to work and grow on, and hopefully getting to a point where we're telling much more complex, rich histories that aren't just sort of how designation bylaws used to be written back in the 70s and until more recently, that were, singular in terms of the story that they were telling.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. What I can also commit to do is to share any education opportunities with this committee that we put on throughout the city. We will be having some more open events within the month of September, some education opportunities, all those different types of things. And again, if you ever want to look at our website, it's always up to date with resources, with training, with opportunities for events within the city. But this summer, there's going to be lots of opportunities to engage with the urban Indigenous community. And I very much encourage you to go out and start to introduce yourself and, shake some hands and make some relationships. And, I think that that's how we're going to move this work in this city forward a lot more. So yeah, all of you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Beth. That was excellent. And yeah, as I guess as Steve was saying, it's just kind of like wanting to look with a slightly broader viewpoint than maybe we had been too focused before, and just a bigger lens. So really
Absolutely.
appreciate that.
No
And
worries.
yeah, and I certainly hope we can see you in the future, and look
Absolutely.
for some opportunities to invite you back.
Thank
Or if
you.
you see things that you need to bring to us, then absolutely love to hear from you.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, Nyawa, everyone, have a great meeting.
Okay, thank you, Beth. Take care.
Nyawa, Alyssa. Bye.
Thanks, Beth.
Okay. So next agenda item is, item 6.2, and heritage process review, staff presentation and consultation on proposed updates to heritage procedural bylaw. And with that, I would like to ask Alyssa to please take the floor.
Thanks, Karen. And sorry, just before we start, could we get a mover and seconder just to receive Beth's
Receive the
presentation?
presentation. May I have a mover and a seconder to receive that presentation? I see Carol and I see Steve. So thank you for that. And Steve, and is there anyone opposed? See none. That is accepted. Received. Okay, thank you. All right. Now, is it your turn, Alyssa?
Yes, thanks, Karen.
Please.
Just pulling up my slides.
you. And if you can keep it to 5 minutes, that'd be great.
I will do my best.
Just
Well,
kidding.
thankfully, I had given folks a bit of an introduction last month because we were much faster than we had anticipated with our agenda previously. But again, my name is Alyssa Golden. I'm the Cultural Heritage Program Lead here at the City of Hamilton. And today we're looking to do some consultation with you folks on the subcommittee about potential changes to our heritage permit process and improvements that we're looking to implement. And we did include on the agenda some background information as well. I know I gave a bit of this overview last month, so I won't go through it in great detail. But essentially, this has been a project that's been ongoing since 2014. There was council direction for staff to review not just our permit process, but also our designation process. And we had outlined a terms of reference for what that review would include. And a significant amount of work was done back at that time, including a best practice review, significant amount of consultation, and the development of recommendations for improvements to both of those processes more broadly here at the city. And that culminated in a stakeholder workshop that we had with key stakeholders, including heritage advocates, heritage committee and subcommittee members, designated property owners. Unfortunately, following that, there was a bit of a hiatus and staff changeover, and those proposed changes never came forward. But we did also see some other changes that forced change individually. So we saw, thankfully, some formalization of how the subcommittee was run. That was one of the challenges that really led to the initial process review. So by formalizing and now publishing our agendas and live streaming the subcommittee, that addressed a lot of the challenges that we were experiencing before in terms of transparency and clarity of process. We also had some legislative changes that came into effect that sort of forced our hand, including Bill 108, and then more recently Bill 23. So a large part of what was in the initial review was really dealt with through Bill 23 in particular in terms of our designation process. And what we're left with as a part of the original review was really to focus on how we can improve our heritage permit process. So fast forwarding to today, what are our project goals? What still sort of stands? Really, we're looking to streamline our heritage processes to help decrease processing time, improve the efficiency of how we work as staff and as a city. We have some additional legislative changes to the Heritage Act that we still need to address. We still want to provide as much clarity and transparency in terms of what our process is for heritage applications and requests. And we have a couple of outstanding business items. These are things that we said we would report back on and haven't yet, including things like a notice of intention to demolish process for listed properties, but outside of the purview of you folks. And what we're proposing is to implement sort of a procedural bylaw for heritage that would address a lot of these outstanding process changes. And hopefully through this consultation and consultation with Heritage Committee, look to bring actual recommendations forward before the next term of these two committees so that we can really start fresh with the new term of council and the committees moving forward. So I'm not sure if folks had a chance to take a look at some of the background materials just for some context, but a lot of this work previously was discussed has been sort of addressed again by things that have happened since that stakeholder workshop took place. So back previously, we were looking at two main changes to the heritage permit process. One was potentially restructuring how permit review itself worked. We had considered whether we keep the subcommittee, and at the time we still had Cross Melville, excuse me. We also looked at how we might restructure those committees, make them potentially only advisory to staff and not public committees that need to be live streamed. And we also looked at potentially dissolving both committees and shifting that function up to the main Heritage Committee. The other main aspect that we previously looked at was just the idea of streamlining delegated approval, which we'll get into a little bit more. But as I noted, we've seen changes already to our permit process. The Cross Melville Advisory Committee was actually already dissolved. So that aspect's been dealt with. And generally what we heard through the previous work was that the permit review subcommittee still held a very important function and folks didn't want to see it dissolved. So really what we're focusing on is no further changes to how this subcommittee works, but how do we streamline the delegated approval process for certain types of applications that this committee and Heritage Committee are comfortable delegating just to staff. So I'll get into that detail a little bit more in a second, but we also just have some general improvements to how we administer heritage permits that we were proposing. So over the last few years, we now, under the Heritage Act, there's now submission material requirements that are outlined in the legislation. We do have that information online, but looking to formalize that and align with what the province requires to be submitted with certain types of heritage permit applications. We'd also be looking to extend what our current standard expiry is for our permits, which is 2 years, and extend that to 3 years. And part of that is just what we're seeing anecdotally in terms of how long projects are taking, the reality of the economy and actually getting contractors and being able to do the work and complete it in time, and that 3 years is a much more reasonable timeline for most of our permits. Looking at clarifying some of the terms around delegated approval extensions. So right now, we typically process a potential extension to a heritage permit only before it's expired. And we do that as part of the authority of the director of our of planning to be able to make minor changes to an existing permit. So that's kind of vague in terms of the authority to do that. We'd look at just confirming and clarifying that authority to be able to provide extensions and actually put that in a potential procedural bylaw so that that is quite clear. We'd also look at providing delegated authority to staff to be able to enter into agreements with owners. So technically under the Heritage Act, we have a required legislative processing time for all permits, 90 days from the time of a complete application. Generally, we're processing things much more quickly than that, but sometimes really complex ones, 90 days might be a tough timeline. And technically, the Act allows us as a city to enter into an agreement with an owner to extend that timeline through a mutual agreement. That would require going to council currently. So providing delegated authority to staff would mean that we could work directly with owners, and that would really streamline that process in those situations where we're both in agreement that more time would be helpful to process those applications. And then finally, in terms of administrative improvements, really trying to clarify council's ultimate authority. So right now, most of what you folks see at this subcommittee are permits that we can approve through delegated authority after we consult with you. The way that our current delegated authority bylaw is written is a little bit vague in terms of whether at any point council could say, actually, we undelegate that authority to staff. So really clarifying that that is possible. And this comes out of really what prompted the permit review when we're dealing with the James Street Baptist Church in terms of how that permit was interpreted as an alteration. And by clarifying council's ultimate authority, it means that any time council could say, no, we're going to make this decision on this permit. Any questions in terms of these high-level sort of administrative types of updates? I'll sort of pause throughout just because there's a lot of information. I'd love to get feedback from folks, but you can save your questions to the end if that's easier, but I might just pause and see if there's any specific questions while we're on particular topics through the presentation.
Graham, go ahead.
Even though this delegated authority, doesn't council have the ultimate final answer when they approve our minutes and pull out the items, such as we had with on that Municipal Heritage Committee minutes when they pulled the gatehouse out to talk about?
So for the permits that this subcommittee sees, the majority of them, we, after consulting with you folks, and if we're in agreement that both staff and the subcommittee recommend approval of the application, we write a report and it goes to the Director of Planning and Chief Planner, and that they issue a letter that is the approval for that permit. The information of what delegated approvals are issued and the letters then go on Heritage Committee for information only. So they're already approved at that point. Those cannot be reversed. It's only while the permit is still being considered and before a decision is made that in theory council could sort of retain their ultimate authority. The item that you're referring to in terms of the gatehouse, that was a situation where a recommendation from the Heritage Committee went to Planning Committee, and then there was sort of a reversal and a discussion. So that's a bit of a different process, but the majority of permits that you folks see, we issue approvals under the delegated authority of staff after we consult with you. So those are the final decisions.
Okay, let's go back a couple of years or a few years and Pinehurst. Remember how that got again taken over by the Heritage Committee? We didn't approve the minutes to change the parameters around the permit. So that's a little more, that's a larger scale project. I understand that, but isn't that kind of the same idea with all things that come through?
So through the chair, in that case, the scope of that application and what was proposed, that required us to write a report after we consulted with the subcommittee to go to the Heritage Committee and then move forward to council for a decision. So that's similar to any sort of demolition related to a Part 4, Part 5 property or new construction in a heritage district. There's certain scopes of work under the Heritage Act that cannot be delegated. And those have to go after consulting with you up through Heritage Committee and then to council for a decision.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that for me.
No problem.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, I don't think. Are there any other questions? Not at this point. Okay. I guess you could carry on then. Thank you, Alyssa.
Okay. Super. And then some additional administrative improvements that are recommended. So as a part of a procedural bylaw to sort of revamp our delegated approval process, we'd want to help define some terms. So one thing is we're proposing is defining what maintenance is and then exempting it from heritage permits. Now, we often make these calls as staff ourselves in terms of is this an impact or not? But having it laid out in a procedural bylaw would make that very clear to us, to the committee, and to property owners. And we'll touch on that in a sec. The main one we'll consult on is streamlining the delegated authority for certain types of minor repairs and alterations. We'll go through that in more detail. And then also defining what an impact is and what minor is to provide some clarity on how these decisions are made. These are things also that sort of came out of our existing process, again, going back to the James Street Baptist Church application originally, in terms of our existing delegated authority references what could be a minor alteration, but there's no explanation. And so that sort of led to some ambiguity of how it's interpreted and how permits are processed. So I'll just share, before we get into sort of the meat of it, which is the streamlining part, I'll just share what we would propose would be put into the definition of maintenance. Hopefully folks had a chance to take a look at these ahead of time, like staff had suggested. There's 2 slides, so I'll just sort of sit on the first one here. But generally what we're trying to identify is things that we don't really have an impact to heritage attributes, that are very common types, scopes of work that aren't concerning, that we want to be clear that these are defined as maintenance and do not need a heritage permit. So things like landscape gardening, replacement of broken glass, so not replacing an entire window, but maybe a pane in a window. Roofing, where you're not changing sort of the color, materials, or design, so asphalt for an example. Repainting, not painting something that wasn't previously painted, but repainting it. And then general sort of repair of non-heritage attributes. So say you're replacing eaves troughs in kind, contemporary eaves troughs, or a railing, things like that, that aren't specifically heritage attributes that are designated. And these are things that we generally make these calls on already, but this is providing some clarity. I'll go to the next one and then happy to pause and talk about any of them. Replacement of exterior lights. So think about, imagine we had every property owner saying, I want to replace my contemporary light on the front of my house and asking if they need a heritage permit. So really clarifying that. Replacement in kind of sidewalks or driveways where you're not widening or changing the materials. Fencing is one that comes up a lot, so just being clear about non-heritage fencing where they aren't actually identified attributes and people's ability to replace fencing in kind. And then also, as we potentially do new heritage districts moving forward, anything else that's also defined as maintenance within those district plans. So hopefully those are relatively straightforward. Any of these definitions of maintenance that folks have any questions or concerns about or want to chat about?
Graham, go ahead.
Okay, first off was the repainting. So when you say repainting, they want to go from a color appropriate to pink. would that come to us, or is that going to still be done through you?
Great question, Graham. So technically, we don't regulate color. None of our heritage designation or heritage conservation districts plans have any policies regulating color. And I suppose a judgment call would need to be made in terms of like a visual impact.
Mhm.
Sorry, Lisa was just pointing out the one below in terms of, yeah, so, I mean, I think we would probably make a judgment call if there was a, although no physical impact, a significant visual impact of something like that. But that's a challenging one because technically we do not regulate color and we don't have policies that regulate color. If there's some concern about that, we could add some additional language to this one to be clear that we think that there's no impact on the heritage attributes of the property, similar to the item F below. Some sort of language to sort of.
I was thinking
clarify
more
that.
of a heritage district impact as opposed to individual property. And when it comes to the fencing,
Wait, let's talk about the painting first.
oh, okay, sorry.
Okay.
Just on that point, so the language that we could use and what we would include in the bylaw, heritage attributes would mean either features that are identified in a Part 4 designated property, so whether it's a contemporary bylaw that actually lists the attributes or the reasons for designation in an older bylaw. And then it would also include whatever the heritage attributes or reasons for designation were for a district. So if there are features that are specifically identified or policies that speak to that, that would need to be taken into account. Would that cover off that concern?
Yeah, it's just like, you just want to maintain the look like that we wanted to designate in the first place, or previous
Mhm.
committees have.
Okay, why don't we take that back as staff and see what that language could look like to address that before we sort of finalize things and bring that forward, moving forward. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, and I would second what Graham said too. I think that paint color is significantly important. It can totally change the look of something. Right? And I mean, you can have a building that's red brick, natural red brick, whatever, original red brick, and then they paint it blue, and it is a very different building. And I mean, I know we've been told before we can't comment on color, and I find that surprising. And I would think that if it's one of the few things we really should be commenting on. But and Carol, I see you're nodding as well. So thank you. Yeah. Okay. Um, anyone else want to comment on the paint, or do we move on to another?
You got Matthew's hand up.
Oh, okay. Sorry, he's not on my screen this second. Okay, Matthew, please go ahead.
It actually wasn't related to paint. It was related to another item, maintenance item.
Okay. Well, you know what? I think we've probably covered off paint. So why don't you go, and then we can come back to Graham with his fencing.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, my question was related to C, glass and broken windows, and I think it's themed, possibly similar in the same vein as discussion about the paint. I think there's a concern that this could lead to a scenario where there's some value engineering that occurs. I'm particularly concerned about a scenario with a broken window where maybe there is a historical element, or something like frosted glass or stained glass where there is some historical significance. Would that definition include the type or design of the glass?
That's a great question. We can certainly provide that clarification in terms of where the glass to be replaced is not a specific heritage attribute. Like I'm thinking, if it was a contemporary window and the pane is being replaced, obviously we have no concerns. But yes, in the situation you're describing, if it's potentially a stained glass window, a transom, something like that, we don't want that just to be swapped out without any review. So that's a great point, and we can add some clarification language there on that one.
Okay. All right. Graham?
Thank you. Okay, so now when it comes to fencing, so they want to change their fence, right? Because you have repair or replacement of fence that is not identified as heritage attributes. But let's say at the moment you got a 3 foot high picket fence, and now they want to put a 7 foot high fence where it's going to block the view, the sight lines from the public right of way. Do we still have some control over that?
Yeah, great point. I would say how I is currently written, I would say yes, that would need a heritage permit. So as it's written, it's only where it's similar materials, design, and footprint. We can clarify, I would think design would include height, but if that's not clear, we can clarify that that also includes height in its design. So for example, if it's an existing 6 foot, pressure treated wood fence and they're replacing it pretty much with the exact same thing, that doesn't need to come to you folks or us. It would just be maintenance. But yes, if they were replacing a contemporary 3 foot fence and are proposing now a 6 foot fence, that's obviously going to be not a similar design. So that would not be maintenance.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we come and we do see these ones, because it makes a huge difference in a sight line of a street, and or even just viewing the building that we've designated. You could block the view very easily.
That makes a lot of sense. We can definitely make that change. That sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone else who has their hand up? I see Andy. Please go ahead.
Yeah, through the chair. Just a quick question regarding the maintenance of trees. A lot of the heritage districts have very large trees. Mill Street Heritage District is one of them. And some of these trees are 75 to 100 years old or older. I'm just curious on the, if somebody was to remove a 100-year-old, let's say maple tree, on their front lawn, obviously can affect the streetscape quite a bit. Is that still needed for a permit, or do they have to get an arborist report on it if it is starting to fall ill? I'm just not sure where we're at with the tree maintenance. I know that branches that are dying off, you can trim them up and what have you, but if it's a complete tree removal of 100-year-plus year old tree, I'm just curious if what would happen in those situations if a permit is needed or not. Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Andy. So for the definition of maintenance, tree removal would not be included. It would be like limb trimming, general good husbandry type of practice for maintaining a tree. That would not include entire tree removal. And we'll touch on later in the streamlined component, potential scopes of work related to trees as well, that might be delegated directly to staff. So we can touch on the potential removal of dead or dying trees and what might be needed in a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any other comments on this section, these specific maintenance items? I don't see any other hands, I don't think. No, okay.
Okay.
Okay, so carry on, please. Thanks.
Super, thanks. The next two definitions that I mentioned would provide some clarity in terms of how we're interpreting what might be delegated directly to staff and what has to come back through you folks for review. The first is around the idea of what an impact is, and this is actually language in terms of displacement effects and disruption effects is what we already do as a part of our internal review when we're writing a recommendation report that goes to the chief planner for a delegated authority, or you might have seen also we do this review in staff reports that go to Heritage Committee as well. So really looking at displacement, so anything that results in any damage, loss, or removal of heritage attributes, and disruption, that's where potentially the color of paint could come in if it was really egregious. So changes that might actions that might result in changes to the setting or character of a heritage property. And then also looking to define the idea of what minor is in relation to those potential impacts. And the idea of what minor would be low potential impact because of either what's being done, where it's being done, or the scope of or size of what's being done. So those are sort of two general definitions we're proposing to include, and these might make a little bit more sense as we go through the streamlined list in a second. So maybe I'll hold any questions on these until we review those, and we can revisit this if that would be helpful.
That sounds good.
All right. So the meat of it, I'm glad we spent that much time on the maintenance. That's exactly what I was hoping we would do in terms of nitpicking some of the language and just really understanding what the subcommittee is potentially comfortable with. And yeah, this is fantastic. But the main part of it is really looking to streamline our delegated authority as staff. So as I mentioned, currently all heritage permits do have to go through the subcommittee for advice. The majority of them are processed through delegated authority that we already have. So ultimately it's council's decision what happens with the heritage permit. But for certain types of permits, we can consult with you and then issue approvals as staff. As I mentioned earlier, this does not extend to certain types of applications like demolition, new construction, or the ability to refuse a heritage permit. That's one that does not come up very often. So you see everything, and most of what you see, we just issue approvals right after. Some of that then goes to Heritage Committee and then goes to Council for a decision. What we are proposing in terms of streamlining that is in a bylaw, identifying a list of what we would consider to be minor types of alterations that this committee and hopefully Heritage Committee would both be comfortable delegating just directly to staff. So you would not need to see them. And we want to make sure there's a comfort level. We're trying to improve how quickly we can process some of these applications, processing times for applicants, but also some of these are relatively straightforward and really safety considerations as well. We want to make sure that you folks really are using your time well and appropriately and are commenting on the types of applications where there's really value in you folks reviewing them. So we have a list of what we think makes sense for this. And as you would have seen in the materials we provided, most of these we actually reviewed at that stakeholder workshop back in 2015 as well, and there was generally support for them. But if we could go through them in detail, that would be great, and this is where we'll spend most of our time. Does that description make sense in terms of the concept? So what we're about to go through are types of permits that you folks are comfortable, would be comfortable not having reviewed, and that we just as staff would process.
Can I say, when we go through this, honestly, by looking at this, and I read everyone and gave it all a lot of thought, I had trouble coming up with a lot of things that would still come to this committee. So that would be helpful if you could also kind of define what sort of things that might actually still be on the list for coming here. Okay.
That's helpful. We don't have that off the top of our heads, but that could be something that we take back and have prepared for when we consult next with Heritage Committee. Lisa's also done a helpful initial review of sort of the last couple of years and pulled out what potentially would be streamlined based on this proposal. I'm sorry we didn't have that in time to circulate to you folks to assist with this review. But I would say anything where there's a direct impact to a heritage feature or attribute that's designated. Anything where, anything substantial like demolition or removal of features. Significant additions to designated properties. Anything that still is undelegated, like new construction within a heritage district. Those would all be coming to you. That's just off the top of my head, but how about we go through these, and then if any more come to mind as we're going through, we can highlight that.
Okay, thanks.
But great point, Karen, thank you. So There's a few pages. So I'm not sure if folks had read through ahead of time, if there's any that come to mind, or we could spend some time on each page. First that we were looking at, now right now we have 2 policy documents that are Heritage Committee and Council endorsed. We have our Historic Masonry Restoration Guidelines and we have Heritage Window Guidelines. This first one would really see if someone is doing essentially repointing something masonry repair related and in accordance with the guidelines, then you folks would need to see it. So if they give us all the information we need, we know what type of mortar they're using, what method they're using, and it all meets the existing council approved guidelines, then we can just issue that approval of staff and not come back through you folks. That's the intent of it. And the way that this first one is worded also, if we were to develop other policy documents in the future, so say we implemented like a commemoration or signage policy document, working with yourselves and with the Heritage Committee, and then that got approved, then anything compliant with that in the future would also be exempt from having to go through the subcommittee for advice. Okay. This second one is probably the one that is a little bit pushing it, and I'm curious to see what folks' thoughts are, but we have existing Heritage District plans for 7 districts and are soon to hopefully be 8th district in Dundas. And they have policies, guidelines that are outlined in them. And what we'd be proposing is anything that's compliant with those guidelines that we know meets the applicable policies in the plan that wouldn't have to come through you folks. And that does not include removal of additions or new additions that are visible from the public right of way. That one might be pretty wide sweeping. I could see maybe not wanting to give up review of all of those, but in theory, if we have adopted plans and what's proposed is meeting those plans, then it should be a relatively straightforward permit. Okay, next one, number 3, installation or replacement of removable storm windows and doors with historically accurate materials and design. So these are things often we see through grant applications as well, where we're already reviewing the details of them. And, you know, they, for example, maybe taking off an aluminum storm and proposing to put a new wood storm that's 1/1, and it meets the intent of what we would want. Something like that, potentially just coming straight through staff. Okay. Number 4 is installation of city designation, interpretive and commemorative plaques. This is something that, especially if we're in the talks, we're in sort of initial works of potentially bringing forward recommendations for a new designation plaquing program. So if we do end up doing a lot more plaquing moving forward, this would really help streamline those approvals. Really, these typically include how are you mounting them to the building, and it's the same sort of standard conditions of, you know, the right types of screws into the mortar joints where feasible when it's a masonry building, that kind of thing. So those should be relatively straightforward. Hopefully folks will be comfortable with those. Number 5, installation of temporary exhibitions or interpretive materials, wayfinding, signage, in situations where they're minor reversible renovations. And this is only for city-owned properties. So thinking about if there's a temporary exhibit that's going in, you know, there's very little physical intervention and what they're doing is reversible. There might be more of a disruption effect in terms of the visual impact of it temporarily, but looking to potentially streamline those through staff and not come through this subcommittee.
So kind of like those signs for the Junos that were going to be on the bridge.
That's a good example. Technically, as they had proposed them, there was no physical impact. They were all intended to be sort of tension fit Yeah, that's a great example. Now, had that proposal been different and there was a physical impact, then that would have been something that would have gone through you folks. Okay. All right, page number 2. Installation of window decals. So these are things like bird-friendly decals that are installed on windows. I think we saw this as a part of maybe the Wood End application. Did they have the wood window decals on that one?
I think so, and then there was also inquiries about putting it on council chamber.
Oh, yes, and here at City Hall, that hasn't come through yet, but there's discussion of maybe putting these installations at City Hall, just with all the glass of this building. So this is something that there is no physical impact for. There's very minimal visual impact, and it's reversible. It's something that we're seeing a lot more inquiries about, especially in terms of just environmental initiatives and trying to reduce impacts to birds and bird deaths for some of our buildings. Okay. Number 7, installation of security lighting and cameras that, in staff's opinion, will have minor impacts on the heritage attributes. This is where these definitions are important. So one example is we had the Gardener's Cottage on Tecumseh on the edge of the Dundurn National Historic Site. And they were looking at installing a temporary security light until they do their restoration work. They technically needed to drill a single hole through the masonry to install it. Something like that, you know, probably not going to be very much change to what's being proposed. So looking to streamline that directly through staff. Number 8, installation of accessibility interventions that, in staff's opinion, will have minor impacts on the heritage attributes. So for this one, there's probably a couple to consider and think about. I think the one that Lisa processed most recently, the exterior accessibility here at City Hall, where the extra railing was added to just behind at the wishbone, where it's being installed into modern concrete, but there's still a disruption. So a heritage permit was triggered, but something like that is a relatively minor impact to the actual heritage attributes of the property. Something like the terrazzo flooring, though, that probably would not be minor. And I know we had a lot of debate on that. So just want to clarify sort of 2 different approaches in terms of how that would be processed. And another good accessibility example, the recent one in Waterdown with the ramp for the school, that would not be minor. That's a substantial intervention in terms of the ramp, and you folks had a lot of great, valuable feedback on the design related to that. So that type of application would still be coming through you folks.
Graham, yes, go ahead. Or go ahead.
No, I did. Yeah. Let's go back to that terrazzo. You're talking about the for the sight impaired, where they put the bumps on the edges.
Yeah, the tactile indicators that were installed at the top of the stairs. Yeah.
I cannot remember that word. I know that's, you just said, is not a minor one, but to me that kind of is, because the techniques they have to collect the dust and collect the material, if they ever wanted to reverse it, I don't ever see that being reversed. Like, you look at how long that project got delayed for approval on that permit. Right? So if they're going to do stuff like that, where we've already approved it once like that, I don't see why you would have to come back to us again for a similar project. Anyone else have a feeling on that one?
I mean, from a staff perspective, that's encouraging to hear. I think if it was a different intervention with fewer drill holes, maybe that would be more clear that it's a minor impact. But if this subcommittee generally, after going through that experience and learning about all the different techniques of what was being done with that, and assuming that that level of detail is provided as a part of a future application for a similar intervention, if this subcommittee is comfortable with something like that being streamlined directly to staff, then we can certainly provide more clarity in terms of interpreting that. But based on how much dialogue happened on that one, I would have assumed the opposite.
Yes, but once they came with that particular design, because you remember you came with 6 or 7 different ideas to begin with. A lot of them were more impactful to the floor and the surroundings and visually impactful as well. Whereas you look at those little bumps that are there for the tactile right now, to me, it was a very minor change to make a huge impact on a disabled person's life or potential impact. And I really don't see how you're going to handle any other intervention like that in any other building in a less impactful way than that particular one we chose.
I think, Graham, what they're saying is that, say the proposal was different than those bumps
And then they
and
come to
bigger or
us.
whatever, so then you probably would want to see it and you have the
Yes.
opportunity to comment.
But I mean,
So
if
I
they're
think,
gonna,
yeah, if it was going to be exactly the same, sure, who could argue? But
yeah, like to me, you said we already hashed it through quite well on that one because that was through 2 different heritage permit review subcommittees, and they came to the Municipal Heritage Committee to talk about accessibility issues, the Ontario Disabilities Act. And we really learned a lot through the process, and that was how we decided to handle it. And like I say, that was the least impactful thing we have, and I can't really see any other floor in front of a staircase being handled in any different way in the future because it is the least impactful.
well, you say that, but it might be different applicants, right, for different places. So, right, say it was a different building, it wasn't owned by the city. Would you really want to just say we don't want to see it?
Well, I'm going to say if it's a terrazzo floor in front of a staircase, we're going to put tactile things in. The only thing that's going to really matter is the color of the tactile parts that they're going to use. But again, that was just my personal opinion,
Yeah,
and that's why I asked if anybody else had a different one.
Yeah, no, that's one project and one type of application, but there could be anything. Like it could be any kind of accessibility application, right? For any other kind of building, any other kind of owner. So I think you don't want to say we never want to see them.
Yeah, and I think if I could add to that, so, I mean, how this is currently worded, I would say that that level of impact would be, physical impact would be more than minor, even though the visual impact is minor. But maybe the better way to approach streamlining some of that is for us to maybe prioritize a policy document that speaks to accessibility interventions and different types of like flooring or locations. And then that way, something like the intervention that was done here with the tactile flooring and the terrazzo, or the tactile indicators in the terrazzo, that could be clearly laid out as something that, you know, has been reviewed and we know how those impacts are being mitigated. And as long as an application is submitted that provides all that information, then that could be addressed by staff. But otherwise, we would fall back on this number 8 and determine if it's minor or not, and then it would come to you folks.
Like I said, to me, that amount of discussion we had left us with the best practice for that style, like in either any kind of masonry floor, ceramic floor in front of a staircase. I think we got to a best practice possible on that one, and it took a lot of work, a lot of meeting, a lot of discussion. It wasn't an easy one, but once we saw that one, and especially anyone like Karen's at City Hall with me a lot, you see it and you hardly even notice it anymore, except when you go to step on that staircase.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's great. It's just a matter of what if we get an application from someone who has completely different ideas? That's all.
Yeah. And I think what I've noted here, I think what would make sense is to leave the language for this as is, but to look to prioritize accessibility guidelines that could fall under number 1 in the future, that has that particular best practice laid out for that type of intervention, as well as anything else that we might research or come up between now and then to put in that document so that that's also covered off in the future.
That'd be great, because I just looked at what we went through, and I think if we can have a great policy written around it, well, that would be helpful. And I did want to make a comment back to the heritage districts, if we could when I get a chance.
Okay, well, yeah. Should we go back to it now? Go ahead, Graham. Point 2, is that it?
Yeah, that one there, that could be a pretty pretty open thing, right? Where that's the one that kind of scares me the most. So I don't know if we could work on again on a policy of what we would like to see come through to us. Like, again, minor stuff, yes, we understand. But we start getting a little bit larger where you think it doesn't impact it as much as we might. That's where you start getting the worries.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like I said, this one's pushing it. So if there are reservations, I think we still have, so far what we've gone through, we still have a good number of ones that I think will be helpful in terms of efficiency. So if this one gets removed, or we can take that back and see if there's any further clarification before we bring it to Heritage Committee. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Thank you.
Okay, just making that note. And then the last one on this page, number 9, installation of mechanical and electrical equipment, things like vent stacks, exhaust pipes that have to penetrate through the building envelope, but only in areas where they're inconspicuous, not visible from the public right of way, and generally have a minor impact to heritage attributes. So think about someone's doing interior renovations and they have to pop out a vent for, a kitchen hood or for a bathroom. And generally, those things are required by code. There's probably very little we can do in terms of where that needs to be. And if those are generally in inconspicuous areas that you can't see from the public right of way anyways, then the visual impact is minor. But in cases where they're front and center and they're going to impact, what you can see from the public right of way, then those would not be delegated. Those would come back through you folks.
So, like the Mutual Burrito vent that came out on the Sheraton property, the Connaught property, remember that a couple of years ago?
Oh, I don't remember that one off the top of my head.
Or the one that was the safe injection site, I think it was, where they were taking out a stained glass window. That would come to us, right?
That, yes, and anywhere where there's actually impacts, more than minor impacts to a heritage attribute. So if they're proposing replacing a window with a vent, that's different. This is contemplating, a small pipe vent that has to pop through the building envelope that's not visible from the street.
Yeah, or a air conditioner on the top of Grace Valley Church in the back. Right.
In the back, yeah.
Yeah.
But not something that you're seeing on the roof from the street. Yeah.
Yeah, because the one on the Mutual Burrito was in the contemporary windows on the main floor. They had to put something in.
We
Very
can take
small
a look
one
at
to
that
come.
one, but I would assume if you're changing the orientation of like a window opening, turning it into a vent, that would not sort of meet this definition of this particular item.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, that's certainly a best practice when someone's adaptively reusing a building. You have existing window openings, try to maybe ventilate through one of those openings instead of making a new opening. But that would be a much larger initiative, and that would not be something that would be just through staff, that would come through you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for all this level of detail. We have a couple more slides. All right, this next one, number 10, installation
Oh,
of.
Carol, I'm sorry, Carol had a comment.
Oh, sorry, Carol, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wondered if it would be a good time to go back to point one before we get farther on, because I'm not very clear on the policy document for historic windows. And this actually, point one, refers to the conservation of and probably restoration of windows. And I know we get a lot of windows involved in the permits, the permit applications that we see. So I'm trying to recall if I have seen the policy on historic windows, and if it talks about how to restore them, or does it actually show people who apply to do perhaps replacement of windows? Does it show them the sort of styles that go with their particular period of their building? And that I notice comes up, and I would hope that we would get to see that if it involves replacing windows, because I noticed in some of the applications we've reviewed, there have been some compromises which are fairly considerable on the type of window that goes, say, in a heritage district, in a particular, say, an Edwardian home or a late Victorian home, that the windows do not, what they want to replace the window with is something that is a more practical solution, like a casement window over a sash window. So I guess just to summarize what I thought I might need to review is the policy document for historic windows that I can't remember reading or seeing. And also that way I would know what is included in it. And also, does it cover replacement of windows as opposed to just conservation restoration of the windows that are there?
Thanks, Carol. That's a great question. So technically we have historic window guidelines. This was sort of the first guideline document that went through Heritage Committee for approval. It's really more of a brochure compared to the second policy document that was prepared, which is the Masonry Restoration Guidelines, which is a very detailed sort of point by point, different types of method material you should be using. The Windows Guidelines, which we can share a link to afterwards, does not go into the level of detail that you're describing, Carol. So I would say, basically, if they're not repairing a window with appropriate measures, or unless we update that policy document, that document currently does not really provide any relief. It's right now, I would say the only document we have that would fit into one appropriately is the Masonry Restoration Guidelines. But we can share that with you, with the subcommittee, so you can take a look. If you have any other feedback, you can let us know.
That'd be great.
And maybe
Thanks.
we can reword this and clarify, because I think we've talked about internally that our goal would be to want to update that Windows guideline to be more detailed, like you're describing, because I think it'd be helpful not just for administering permits, but just for property owners' information and helping better guide them in their decision making. But we could revise how one is worded and maybe just reference the historic masonry guidelines now as being an existing approved policy, and then reference other potential future policies, including windows, signage, placking.
Great.
And maybe
Thanks.
when those new ones are drafted up, that would be, I think the committee might want the opportunity to review them and comment.
Oh, yes. So that anything that, I mean, the existing documents that we have were produced by Heritage Committee. They went through the Policy and Design Working Group originally. They went through the subcommittee and Heritage Committee before they were council approved. So we would expect the same process. I'm not sure if it would be staff initiating it or potentially working with policy and design first and then consulting with you folks. But yes, that would be the expectation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Oh, Lisa's just suggesting, before I get back to where we were at, just checking any more questions on this first slide of items 1 through 5. Not seeing any, okay.
I don't have any.
Any more questions on 6 through 9?
No.
Okay, super. And yes, this is where we're at. Yeah, okay. On to number 10. Installation of pools in a rear yard in a heritage district where they're not visible from the public right of way and there's no impacts to heritage attributes. So think of, technically this is an intervention in the district, but if they're not impacting, say, a mature tree that you can see from the public right of way or something like that, then this type of thing does not need to come through you folks. We did chat through how, depending on where a pool is installed, they might have to put a fence in terms of meeting code requirements. But if we can't see that fence from the public right of way, if it's behind another fence or other vegetation or something like that, then we would just process that through staff. Okay.
Is this any different from putting on a deck in the back, or is that different because the deck might be actually touching the heritage building?
Great question. We currently, in terms of sort of our review of whether there's an impact, if someone is installing a deck and we cannot see that deck from the public right of way, anything essentially in a heritage district that you can't see from the public right of way, unless it's complete new construction or demolition, like a new garage or something else that we can't void or can't waive, that doesn't require a heritage permit already.
Okay.
That was a really complicated answer. Sorry, did that make
No,
sense?
but no, are you saying the pool does require a heritage permit right now? No, it doesn't.
We want to be clear that if actually, Karen, let me just think for a second. Why do we have this in here? If there's no impacts to heritage attributes and it's not visible, do we even need this? That's a great question. We currently say, Lisa's just pulling up our list on our heritage permit page, but legislatively, if it's not visible, thanks for questioning this. I don't think we even need to put this because it would not trigger a permit. This is actually one that we had on the list that we consulted with back in 2015, and this is why this kind of
all the
conversation
good people
is
got on the
helpful.
committee. Yeah. Okay.
Not actually necessary. Okay, thank you. Okay. 11, removal of signage or alterations to signage that don't significantly change their location, dimensions, building coverage, unless that signage is a heritage attribute. So think about, there's already a signboard, it's a contemporary signboard on a designated property. There's a change of who the tenant is in that commercial property and they change the sign. But that sign itself is not a heritage attribute, it's contemporary. They're not changing its location or dimensions. That would not need to go through you folks. There could be minor physical impacts to the building as a result of it, but generally that would help sort of streamline applications for new businesses who need to put in a new signage, essentially. This one might be a little bit more challenging. I know you folks
Yeah.
I see Graham has his hand up. I know you folks have
Yeah,
a lot of
Graham, go
comments on like the Stone Terrace as an example, a lot of the signage that's gone up there lately. So yeah, looking for any feedback you have on this.
Okay, 'cause I think of two signs that we've recently done: the African restaurant in the William Thomas building, and then let's go back to my Mucho Burrito. I don't know if you know, Mucho Burrito is no longer there. It is now a Starbucks. I just happened to notice that last week when I was going down taking some pictures for the Heritage Conference. And the new sign that went in to that spot, I don't know if it's the exact same or not. I didn't have time to go investigate. It's ugly. It's a horrible material. It looks gaudy. Where we negotiated with Mutual Burrito to put a nice looking sign up with some texture to it and all that stuff. So we're going to have to get good wording in place when it comes to the sign policy of what they can and can't change on a heritage building. So if anyone's got some time and they want to walk or by the Connaught and take a look at that Starbucks sign, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's not attractive on the building.
Okay, that's helpful, Graham. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, when I was doing the pre-read, I also thought, I mean, alterations that don't significantly change its location, dimensions, or building coverage, it's true, they may not change, but you can certainly change the look of a sign and make it go from quite acceptable on a heritage building to something hideous, right? So I think either you need more qualifiers here, or they maybe still should come to this permit review.
Okay, I think that's fair. I think similar to what we were talking about with the repainting and with the, what was the other one that was policy related? I think it might make sense to remove this one and then look to include more detail and best practice in a potential signage policy and address it that way instead.
Okay.
I think that's a great idea. Thank you.
All right, and I see some other committee members nodding, so, all right, thank you.
Okay. Super, this is going great. 12, here's where we circle back, Andy. Removal of trees identified by a qualified tree professional and licensed tree cutter as being significantly or completely dead or as a public safety concern. So I'll just preface that this language we consulted with our colleagues in forestry, who are also concurrently working on an urban tree strategy or urban forest strategy, sorry, and are looking to potentially regulate the cutting of private trees as well. This policy would apply to both public and private trees, but we would define these terms and work with forestry to define them. But essentially, they want to make sure that qualified people are determining whether the tree is significantly or completely dead to justify their removal. And the idea would be that this would come through staff because it's an immediate concern. Really, there's no arguing about whether it's safe or dead or not, and we can't technically require replanting. That's the best practice, obviously. So to have these just come through staff and be able to process these as quickly as possible, because it's usually a safety matter. Now, to your earlier question or point, Andy, just curious, I know you probably will want to know that that's happening, especially like in the Waterdown district. Is there a level of comfort with this? I mean, I guess the issue is we would report the same way we do now. It would be on the Heritage Committee agenda in terms of the approval having been provided. We don't have any other sort of notification process in place.
Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Through the chair. So if some of these are being decided by staff, is there any update to our committee that this actually was approved? Just to let you know this, in case somebody sees a tree come down in a neighborhood and then calls it in and say, listen, there's no permit that came through and this is a 150-year-old tree and it's being torn down. Is there any update that staff would give, like at the beginning of these meetings or something, just to let you know this has been approved, or is it just just sort of, it's been approved and it's gone through the chair?
Yeah, that's a great question, Andy. Right now, we haven't contemplated that. Right now, within our current process, after we consult with you folks and we process a delegated approval letter, it only goes on the Heritage Committee agenda for their information. But why don't we take that back and think about logistically? I mean, I don't necessarily want to have like a redundant process, but since we won't be, in theory, if this is approved, moving forward, we wouldn't be consulting with the subcommittee on these applications. So it could be, yeah, under items and for information, or there could be worked into the heritage bylaw some expected process of notification for this subcommittee on permits that are approved through a streamlined authority.
I mean, that would be interesting, but currently you already approve things, lots of things, if I'm not mistaken. Because I would ask questions, a roof looks like it's being worked on. You said, oh, it's okay, we already gave them permission. So there's already things like that happening now, right? And we never hear about them.
Yeah, there's scopes of work where we make an interpretation of whether or not something requires a heritage permit. So like some of the things that we're looking to define as maintenance, for example, like replacing an asphalt roof where there's no visual or physical impact, those things don't require a heritage permit. So there's no formal approval that's happening, but we're confirming with an owner. So yeah, there's no reporting on things like that. But in theory, everything that does require a permit currently, you folks see. So yeah, how could we provide clear reporting back to you folks on things that if this is approved, that we as staff are approving without your review, so you know that that's taking place?
Could we have just like a list of things, just like what the project was and the address, and with what it was a delegated approval, and just when you give us our documents every month, just add it to that document list and we review it, and anything that we have a concern with, we can ask you about it, just to make sure that we're all kicking with the same foot for a couple of years as we pull stuff out. We understand that we're not overstepping bounds, or you aren't overstepping bounds, or we aren't being overly concerned, because we do get questioned in the public realm about projects, right?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Well, especially, yes, if this, moving forward, if this is approved, we'll want to be checking in and understanding if we need to tweak things and if our understanding on both sides is clear. So let's take that back in terms of what that reporting process would look like. I mean, we've talked about trying to get all of our heritage permits mapped as well. Maybe it's something we could look at putting on our website in terms of recently approved permits and having that be a little bit more accessible. But I think that makes a lot of sense. So let us take that back and come up with some suggestions of how that reporting might work.
Yeah, and that might be good for transparency for the public as well, right? Having it there on your website.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, great comment. Just making that note, one sec. Okay. And then similarly along the line of trees, planting of new trees where there's no or only minor impacts to heritage attributes. So, I'm thinking there's been a lot of initiatives lately to replace trees that have been lost or to proactively plant as a part of the climate change strategy. Obviously, if trees are being planted in a way that would be impacting a landscape that's protected and as a heritage attribute, that would be different. But if you're sort of adding trees to an existing woodlot or area within a park that's designated or something like that, in theory, we could streamline that process. Is Sorry, what was that?
Replacing street trees.
Or, yes, Lisa just said, or replacing street trees, so thinking about the boulevard where, in that case, we have a heritage district plan that speaks to the species of trees that are appropriate, so if they're planting within that, in theory, those would just go back through staff and not through you folks. But I know we've had a lot of conversation about trees, so yeah, just trying to get a sense of if there's a comfort level for that one.
Yeah, I understand what you're talking about, and I really miss David Beelan's reports monthly on the trees on the boulevard.
Stop. Yeah, okay. And then the last one around the
Oh, sorry, I
foundation.
see Matthew has his hand up.
Oh, Dizzy, I'm sorry, Matthew, please go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. I've been toggling off and on and off camera. Yeah, I just wanted to note, I think when there have been discussions about trees, it's always been a challenge, I think, for other than one of us to speak to it because of just of the or varying degrees of knowledge of horticulture and I don't believe, certainly myself, not an arborist. So I really appreciate you reaching out to forestry. I think I'm happy that we've reached out to them. And I think that covers I think it covers our basis. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and then the last one on this page, repairs to the foundation of a building or structure, including installation of weeping tile, where there are no anticipated impacts to the heritage attributes. So this one we're seeing a lot more in terms of people retrofitting. They might need to dig to do this work, but then they're restoring the grounds to what they were before, after, and we don't see what they've done. So there's no visual impact, and also only when it's appropriate in terms of the type of material and what the intervention is taking place. But we're seeing a lot more of this and a lot more of these types of applications coming forward. So if there's a comfort level, we think that this is something that's straightforward enough that we as staff could process.
Yeah, I do have a little comment on that one.
Graham, go ahead.
Yeah. A lot of foundation works where they put weeping tile in and put in new membranes on the outside of buildings and the modern products and techniques, they will remain above grade. So you're gonna have to be careful how you word that because there always will be a visual impact, like the school down in the East End there off Birch and the corner of Markland and James, right? Those are two, one they got a permit, one they didn't get a permit. You know what I mean? And if you look today, you can still see that dimple stuff above grade.
That you're talking about the spa at the corner? Yes,
Yes.
we had a long conversation about that. In that case, I know that that's been a challenging one. It should not be visible. Like they should be grading away and it should be covered. So in that situation, I mean, that's more of an enforcement issue in terms of dealing with how the permit was executed. But in theory, if works are being done and the grounds are being restored after the works are being done, then that should be straightforward.
Yep. That'd be something that the heritage staff and city staff will have to, bylaw staff, sorry, will have to really make sure that they keep an eye on because it is pretty easy to do a poor job in the visual side of that. And